on to Claudio. Claudio Ribeiro is a harpsichord and conductor in a variety of period orchestras and ensembles and has brought The Hague since 2006. Won't go any further than that. Take it over, Claudio.
Okay. In this presentation, I will speak about the practice of adding continuo figures to the left-hand staff of solo keyboard pieces in Italy in the first half of the 18th century. Up to this moment, I was able to identify the use of this kind of notation in a number of pieces from this period, connected either with Naples or with the northeast of Italy. Giovanni Sanguinetti categorizes it as one of the cases of hybrid notation and speaks briefly about it in the art of partimento. But I haven't been able to identify any study on how to perform it or any method from the time, as most of those which deal with figures concern either partimento or basso continuo as an accompaniment tool. These figures are usually applied to the left-hand basses, which are not essentially contrapuntal or which don't carry thematic material. Its use isn't consistent. Sometimes the figures are just a reminder of the appropriate harmony one should play or indicate unexpected harmonies which would divert from the regola dell'ottava, as in the usual Italian figuring practice. Other times they are an abbreviation of the actual musical text. In the first case, one will probably find only a few figures, if not only one, and in the latter, the piece might be figured throughout. This was one of the first examples I came across of this kind of notation, and my first question was, how should I perform it? Should I add extra notes only to the bass notes which have a figure above? I'll come back to that later. This is an example of the first case. Here, the sixth in the second half of the first bar isn't indicated, but the seventh in the second bar, not necessarily expected by the performer, is indicated next to its resolution. The sixth in bar 4 is a reminder that the bass needs a 3/6 chord because of its function in modern understanding as the leading tone of the next chord. Here's another example by Ginazzoli, in which the octaves in the left hand are indicated with figures. This one falls in the second category. Here, Marcello used numbers to indicate specific notes he would like the performer to play. And we can use the second part of this movement as a confirmation of that. Ginazzoli was probably working in Bologna when he wrote his sonatas, and Marcello lived in Venice, except for the last year of his life. Let's now move south to Naples. Alessandro Scarlatti uses figures in some passages of his partite, where the bass is clearly an accompaniment and not a solo voice. When the basso has the main role, the right hand accompanies with chords, and in this case, the chords are written out without figures. The number of voices in the right hand is mostly but not restricted to 3. As we can see in the last bar of the first system, parallel fifths in the outer voices of the accompaniment aren't necessarily a problem. When both lines interact in a contrapuntal way, the bass only has figure in the longer, not solo notes. I'll open a quick parenthesis just to show that figures were sometimes used on the right hand, just not by Scarlatti in this case. As we can see in this anonymous 18th century manuscript from Venice, the author first writes all notes in the right hand, and in the fourth system uses figures for the thirds. Coming back to Scarlatti, we have two pieces of evidence on how to possibly realize these figures. In the first example, Scarlatti uses figures for the left hand and writes on the first note, qui fa consonanza piena con la mano sinistra. Here one plays the full consonances with the left hand. Full consonances can be interpreted as complete harmonies, as one can see in Scarlatti's partite and in the next evidence from his toccata seconda. As in the right-hand chords of his partite, here Scarlatti also writes chords with mostly 3 voices, but sometimes also 4, as in the 2/4 dominant chord in the third system. Note that also here parallel fifths are not a problem, as you can see in the bottom of the score. Here's another example by Scarlatti from the same collection. We are now in the first quarter of the 18th century, seeing examples from a composer who was in Naples but had learned music, most probably in Palermo and Rome, and had a wide musical baggage. I would like to show now a later example from Naples. These are some excerpts from Durante's Quattro Stagioni, written in 1747. Durante had his initial musical education in Naples and probably worked in Rome on more than one occasion. Durante's left-hand chordal accompaniment is written out, and the number of voices varies from 2 to 4, most likely according to the character of the movement. Here we see fragments from spring, on top, summer, and autumn. I would like to mention that based on the evidence I've seen until now, it seems that in Naples it was more common to write chordal accompaniments in full, whereas in the northeast of Italy, their abbreviation with continued figures was more customary. Going back to the northeast, I would like to show an example by Giovanni Francesco Modonesi. Almost nothing is known about him, except that a sonata by him is found in an 18th century manuscript in Bologna, which contains, apart from this sonata, pieces by the Bolognese composer Giovanni Battista Predieri, who was mainly active in the second quarter of the 18th century. Here, Modonesi alternates passages written with figures with written out passages for the left hand. We see in the written out passages that every note of the bass is accompanied, and not only the first of each group of 2 or 4, as one would do with fast repeated notes following the usual continual practices. And since he makes the difference between a 3-3 and a 3-5, we can also deduce that the figures here represent the notes one is supposed to add. This is an example of how one can realize these figures. Hope you could hear it. Okay.
Yes, we could.
Another piece by Modonesi gives us a hint on how to deal with leaps. Here the repeated notes are harmonized, not with the full harmony, and the leaps not. Durante writes in a similar way in his Quattro Stagioni. This is an important characteristic of the later style of Durante and Modonesi. The chords don't need to be complete. 2 notes complementing the one on the right hand, or even an octave are often enough. We can also see this in Cotumaccios Principi. In Gasparini's L'armonico pratico al cimbalo. In fact, here Gasparini gives us some evidence of a similar practice used in basso continuo performance, in this case of complementing the harmony with the left hand while the right hand plays an embellished passage in order to give grace to the accompaniment. He says, I would like to show you many kinds of diminutions, ornaments, embellishments, and other ways of lending grace to the accompaniment. In these examples, then, the necessary consonances are performed with the left hand, while the right hand plays the upper part as shown below. Next to the usual figures used in basso continuo, he adds some to indicate that the accompaniment of the left hand should complement the harmony according to what was missing in the right hand, or the bass. Here, however, he adds notes also when the bass has leaps. We must not forget that this is not a solo keyboard piece. Yes, we must not forget that this is not a solo keyboard piece, so it's a different practice, although it's similar. As an experiment, I decided to deconstruct a sonata by Grazio May in order to better understand the practice of adding figures to the left hand. I haven't found any information about this composer, who could also be Graziano May, and I'll be very grateful if someone could share any hint. This piece is found in an 18th century manuscript at the British Library, which contains pieces by composers from the northeast of Italy, Benedetto Marcello, Galuppi, Francesco Modonesi, and Matteo Veneto, among others. This is the original piece, the first section of an allegro. The accompaniment of the left hand is written in two voices throughout the piece, except for the passages with leaps or a scale in bars 13 and 16, and for the final arpeggio. Here I replaced the upper voice of the left hand by figures. I also added figures to the notes to which an octave was originally added. And I'll just go back to the original one so you can compare. So, for example, in bars 12 and 13, where there were octaves, I added a figure indicating the harmony which would fit to that passage. I went a step further and also simplified this passage, keeping only the main bass notes with their figures. The result was a score similar to other pieces from this style, Northeast Italy, middle of the 18th century, written with a simple left hand with figures such as scores by Tinazzoli, Modonesi, or Benedetto Marcello. It's certainly impossible to make a summary of basic rules of this practice, as every style is particular, as is the case with any other feature of performance practice. Therefore, I decided to make a collection of aspects involving this practice, which gives us a general idea of how to realize these figures. One may generally add 1 to 2 notes to the bass, resulting in an accompaniment with 2 to 3 voices. In passages with repeated notes, one accompanies each note of the bass with the same added notes. If there's a suspension of or a dissonance before the third of the bass, this may be accompanied by the fifth or by playing tasto solo. Large leaps don't need to be accompanied. The last note of a section is often played tasto solo or accompanied by an octave. It's not necessary to always add the third of the harmony, even if the right hand isn't playing it. And this is a practice that is closer to basso continuo than to counterpoint. I'll now go back to the Tinazzoli example I mentioned in the beginning. Based on the analysis of examples which are closer in style and geographically to Tinazzoli, I'd like to show my proposition for realizing it. Again, it's important to keep in mind that, as in basso continuo realization, the possibilities for realization differ substantially and are very localized, often with specific features for each composer or short period of time, city, house, dietary habits, etc. Thank you.